The question arises in us every now and then. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why do bad things happen to innocent people? Why did that storm have to devastate that area? Why did that volcano erupt? Why did that earthquake level that city? Why was that person elected? We all ask these questions, and many times we're actually looking for some justification, some explanation that turns natural events into punishment from an angry god, an angry planet, some angry spirit that's just out for revenge. That's not really why bad things happen. So let's talk about why bad things happen today as we walk together down creation. Hello, everyone. My name is Charlie. I am a Christopagan druid and priest of Bridget.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brian. I'm a Christopagan druid and sous chef to the Dogdo.
Today, I feel like this is the most natural follow-up to our episode yesterday on Fate, which if you haven't watched or listened to, you might want to do that as a preliminary to this. It's not required, but it will inform a lot of the things that we're saying in this episode. So, you may want to check that out. And this is a part of our continuing Druidcraft 101 series, where we're working to help people either start their craft, perfect their craft, or at least have a common language so that we can do this magic thing better together.
And yesterday's and today's were both a continuation or a further exploration into topics covered in the second chapter of the book.
Druidcraft by Philip Cargon. All right, before we get into this episode, if you haven't already, don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, whatever the terminology happens to be on, whatever the app is you're listening to us on. We do original Christopagan and Druid episodes 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. And right now we're going through our Druidcraft 101 series, which will go through the middle of March. So you don't want to miss a thing. We got a lot of stuff planned and stuff that I think will actually improve your practice and help you navigate this life a little bit better. All right, let's just get into it, shall we? So yesterday we talked about fate, and we talked about our Dana, the fate that we were born with, and our weird, the fate that we make for ourselves. It's very tempting for a lot of people to try to say that bad things happening to people is their fate. This is born partially out of a very, very misunderstanding of karma, which, as somebody who is not a practicing Hindu, I am not going to get into all that much. Let's just suffice it to say the pop culture understanding of karma, as it's generally used in most English-speaking worlds, has little to no resemblance to the way that concept is used in either Hinduism or Buddhism, in the schools of Buddhism that do use it. Fate also, it doesn't have anything to do with why bad things happen to people. Now, you can create a thread of weird that will do terrible, terrible things to you. If you start gossiping behind somebody's back and they show up and smack you in the face, yes, that was fated. You set that course of action into motion to bring that smacking into your own face.
Or like, say you're a good person, but you weave a person that draws a lot of drama to them into your life. You weave them in. You're also weaving in all that energy of that drama. And next thing you know, all these bad things are now happening.
But those usually aren't the kinds of things that we're talking about when we're asking the question, why did bad things happen to good, innocent, or just generally to people? Usually when we're talking about that, we're talking about a storm, a natural disaster of some sort, a car accident, a sudden illness. And it is very tempting to try to attach those things to some kind of thread of fate. And how can I say this without being misunderstood on the internet? Sometimes with contagious diseases, that can be true because there is a thread of decisions that went into play that carried the transmission of that disease from person to person to person to the person that is generally in our thoughts at the time. That does not mean that that person deserved to get sick. There's no deserving in that, but that's why we actually do contact tracing and stuff with infectious diseases to try to cut off that chain of fate, that thread. So there is like barest minimum of truth in some of that, but no one has ever done anything to deserve Mount Vesuvius covering your city in an ash cloud. No one has ever done anything to deserve the tidal wave that hit Fukushima or the tidal wave that rocked the islands in the South Pacific. No one has ever done anything to deserve those things. Those things just happen. And they may feel out of our control because they are. A big part of doing the practice of magic is realizing no matter how strong you get with the arts, no matter how practiced you are, some things will always be out of your control, and you have to accept that.
This is where I want to draw some attention to and some caution to the word deserve, because I think this is where some people get really hung up. When you're looking at the causality chain leading to an event and rippling back from an event, you can see how actions caused reactions to lead to a thing. That doesn't mean it was deserved. Deserved is a totally different, that is a judgment call. That is casting judgment on a thing that has nothing to do with cause and effect that led to the event that in question. The first thing you really want to do is to be very careful to properly place the term deserve in your mind as a judgment term so that you can avoid using it.
It will help hit all of us. When we're talking especially about a lot of the natural disasters that are happening lately with the fires and the tornadoes and the hurricanes and the droughts and the heat waves and the blizzards and the snowstorms and the ice storms, we all contributed to climate change. So if we are all part of the causal chain that made those events stronger, that made those events more powerful and more deadly. But if we're being honest, corporations did the lion's share of that, and we mere humans did very, very little in comparison. Don't let anybody ever try to get you to believe that climate change has a personal thing that you can do to make it better. We contribute so little to the greenhouse gases compared to these mammoth corporations that are just spewing greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, that if we all went green, if we mere mortals went purely green energy, it wouldn't even affect emissions enough to matter. We have to do something about the corporation. Now, I'm saying this because that's not to say the corporations did this to us then.
Because that's a judgment call again. It's only going to lead to suffering.
It's a system. It's all an intricate system. This is where we need to go back to the law of the returning tide. Why did that storm hit? Because storms is how the atmosphere brings equilibrium to itself. That's what a storm is. That's all that a storm is. There's excess energy in the air. There's too much moisture and there's too much heat. And that has to be brought into balance. The quickest and most efficient way, remember, the universe itself is by nature lazy. Everyone who wants to talk about the industriousness of this, that, and the other, no. The universe is lazy. It will always find the quickest, easiest, most efficient way to achieve whatever it's trying to achieve. And the atmosphere wants to be stable. It wants to go back to balance. It wants to get rid of these excesses within it. And the quickest, most efficient way to do that is to transfer some of that energy into kinetic energy. So the winds start blowing and the waves start getting picked up. Some of that gets turned into the energy required to the raindrops to precipitate out of the atmosphere. Some of that turns into the winds themselves. That is the atmosphere dissipating energy. That's all that is going on there. That is all that is happening. It is a shame when that dissipation causes harm or damage. But this is where, for us, as we're doing our practice and learning the law of the returning tide, remember, the law of the returning tide is not the pop culture idea of karma that you get back what you put in. No, we're all throwing things into the ocean, and the ocean is sometimes pulling back to the shore different things. And those things can have a myriad of different effects. Okay. So if you're a mountain range with no humans on it and a storm hits, that's going to create water that's going to run down those mountains into all of the creeks and streams, into the rivers, and it's going to soak into the land, and it's going to make the land fertile and able to produce life. There's a cycle that exists between the sandstorms in Africa, whip up all the sand into the atmosphere, and that sand gets carried across the ocean. Some of that will make storms along the way, but will start seeding the clouds once it gets over Brazil. And those thick clouds carrying all of that sand and all of that vapor from the ocean goes over Brazil, and it starts raining and it starts raining, and it goes all the way up to the Andes Mountains, and all of that moisture and sand gets squished out of it and flows down into the river systems and back out to the ocean, and the cycle continues. All of those nutrients from all of that soil and sand that got whipped up in the sandstorms in Africa make the Amazon rainforest possible. They also wreak untold damage as houses flood and hurricanes hit places and other storms and droughts and what have you. It is a current, it is a flow. Sand is being thrown up into the air. And some people, that sand will bring a hurricane. For other people, that sand will bring the waters that make their lives possible. We throw out into the ocean what we throw into the ocean, but we never know what is going to come back. And that's where this idea of deserving falls apart. Because for every one person that you can say, this person did a bad thing and this bad thing happened to them, aha, they deserved it. I can show you 10 to 100 bad people who did terrible things and lived long, prosperous, happy lives.
Just looking back at the law of returning tide, just imagine you're on a beach and you got Bob up the shoreline just a little bit from you, chucking a bunch of trash in the ocean. Yes, it might wash back up on Bob. It might wash up on you. It may not hit either of you. This is where learning acceptance comes in super handy. And you can learn acceptance just through studying this law of returning tide and observing it. Because once you can detach yourself from that judgment of deserving this or deserving that, detach yourself from it and then just accept that all of us are putting stuff into the ocean, all of us are taking stuff out of the ocean, and the tide's just going to wash up what it's going to wash up. We can, through working of the weird, try to weave things into our lives so we can have better stuff wash back. And we can be mindful about what we put into the ocean. Sometimes it just comes back. And it's just a matter of accepting.
This is where these two concepts really start playing together, the law of the returning tide and what we were talking about yesterday with our Dana and weird. Remember, every action that you take with intention is a magical action. So that doesn't matter if you're casting a spell or making a cup of tea. If you're taking an action with intention, it is a magical act. So seeing this fated storm coming your way, you now have the ability to weave as best you can your own fate into this. You know how to take shelter, where you should take shelter. You can start making plans if you live in an area where certain types of weather are common to mitigate and prepare for those energies coming to shore. This is really where we can, for those things that we can predict, and not all things are predictable, by the way, but, and that's something that I think hits us hardest is when a very unpredictable thing happens and we're like, but why did that happen? Why did this happen to these people? Why did this happen? Right? Like an earthquake, for example. But even with earthquakes, we have some control over our weird in that we can put in the building codes that are necessary to make sure that the buildings don't fall down. Earthquakes hit Japan all the time, and it's fairly uncommon for newer constructions to fall down. The older constructions that were made prior to the building codes still do tend to fall down from time to time. But you learn how to build buildings that don't fall down when the earth shifts. That's taking control. That's that intentional action that is magic.
Yeah, this is where I really liked your story of the kelp. The ocean's fated to have kelp. That is part of its Dana. Kelp is there. And kelp can be wonderful. It's a food source that a lot of life can feed upon and be nourished from. And it can filter and do all these wonderful things. Kelp can also get pulled into turbines and completely jam them up and be a huge mess, hindering power production and other sources that utilize that ocean water. This is where learning that weaving of the weird comes in. So this doesn't mean you cast a judgment call on the kelp if you're working a turbine and go, all kelp is evil, therefore we must destroy it. No, you weave in how do you redirect that kelp so that you don't pull it into the turbines, because you also recognize that it's a food source. It is part of that environment. It needs to be there. It is beneficial for the environment. And so you weave it into the other elements of the environment so that it can be there for that and can feed things.
It is as unjust to be angry at a deity who did not send a storm to do anything as it is to be mad at the kelp for gumming up the works or the beaver for making a dam. Beavers make dams. It's what they do. But you can learn how to work with them so that they can actually do some of the work for us and we can work together and live together. They're better at water management than we will ever be. They have a literal natural instinct for it, and they can be working 24 hours, 365 on a project that we don't have to spend the money to do. We found ways to actually encourage beavers to build dams where we want them to be built, to do water management on our behalf, and to make sure that they're not putting dams where we don't want them to do. But we've created this concept of a nuisance species, this thing that we want to get rid of. Now, some of them we can start having very elaborate discussions about, like, for example, screwworms. Screwworms are horrible, nasty, terrifying things. And if your grandparents never told you about screwworms, or you have never heard of screwworms, then you either live in you live in a country that doesn't have them, or you live in the United States where we don't have them anymore. We decided that these flies, because a screwworm is actually a fly, they're called screwworms because of the way their larval state exists, which is where they wreak most of their havoc. We decided that they were not worth having, and we eradicated the entire species. We got rid of them. They don't exist anymore in the United States. They still exist in the world, and we are still doing things to manage their populations around the world because they can be dangerous and harmful. And we've also been studying to see if the environment noticed their absence. These are all big questions. But to those screwworms, we are a terrible, evil monster that eradicated them. They're no longer in the United States. They don't exist here anymore. And I say that, and I'm living in fear of them getting re-imported on a boat or something. But we'll just go after them again like we did the first time. Whether we should or not, that's a matter of debate. But that is taking fate into our own hands. That's learning to work with the systems that are in place and figuring out what it is that we want to do about them. I'm not saying that it was a good thing that we got rid of them. I do think that there's been enough studies of certain types of mosquitoes that maybe that we should be doing eradication for them, especially in a lot of Pacific islands where we introduced them in the first place, and they're wreaking havoc on the indigenous animal populations there. That's definitely something that we should be doing because we made the mistake of introducing the bugs and they don't need to be there. But that's about bringing balance. But to all of those places, they're like, why do humans do terrible things? Well, we didn't introduce rats and mosquitoes around the world on purpose. They hitchhiked. They happened. They were an accident. That's what we have to realize with a lot of this. We don't like accepting the random nature of the world. We don't. And I think that's why a lot of our spiritual and philosophical practices encourage us to spend time around rivers and lakes and oceans and whatnot. Because when you start understanding exactly how random these systems are, it helps you get more comfortable with those natural ebbs and flows and even if you see a wave moving in, you can make certain predictions, but you'll never know what that wave is going to look like when it hits the shore until it hits the shore. It's always going to be a slightly different shape. It's going to go slightly different distance. You'll be okay at starting to guess, but you're never going to guess it 100% correct. That's why we refer to this as the law of the returning tide. We can predict the tides. Never forget, we can predict the tides. We know, well, the moon's here, the sun's there, the earth's there. So we're going to have at about this time, we're going to have high tide and it's going to be about this high up. We can make all of those predictions. And we're pretty good at that. We've been practicing this for thousands of years and only refining our techniques for all that time. But if a storm blows through, that wave is going to be higher. That tide is going to be higher. That storm surge is going to be higher. So even with all of our powers of prediction, even with all of our skills put to bear to make these things more predictable and easier for us to manage, they're still not. We can predict a storm surge, but we don't really know what the storm surge is going to be till the storm hits the coast. That's why you always get a range. They never tell you we're going to get exactly 17 centimeters of storm surge in this location because we don't know that. And we'll probably never have modeling systems sophisticated enough to give us that level of specificity.
So many subtle little factors that just go in that are so hard to account for. For instance, you could have somebody that goes to the beach, they decide they want to just hang out on the beach, they don't want to get wet, so they choose not to go in the ocean. Okay, they're dry, but then suddenly a rainstorm kicks up and they get wet. Like, it's quite possible that their presence brought just enough of a shift in temperature and just enough extra humidity from their body emitting the extra temperature and humidity that sent the weather over into rain. It's something that a lot of people don't even consider when calculating like all the other weather factors, like just the presence of one more person that could be the tipping point in the weather.
It's the whole
And
butterfly
shifting.
effect.
Yeah.
You never know how one little thing will cascade into something much larger somewhere else. We don't like the fact that we live in chaotic systems. And I think it's really important, especially for us. I don't see a lot of discussions of theodicy, which is what this is called. This why do bad things happen to people? That's the philosophical name for this type of discussion in magical circles. And I think partially that's because either people get into magic because they think that it will give them the ability to have control over every aspect of their life. Because magic is often sold as having control over every aspect of your life, or because they have accepted that chaos and understand that it is just a part of nature and don't go into discussing the whys. It's not interesting to them. But I think we need to focus in on this from time to time and really accept that we live in a chaotic universe. And that is the truest way of saying that, because I keep hearing people use the phrase an indifferent universe. Sometimes a cruel and an indifferent universe, or a cold and an indifferent universe. We don't live in an indifferent universe. And I can prove that to you. Storms happen. If nature was indifferent, it wouldn't care that there's a warm, humid patch of air here and a cold, dry patch of air there. That's indifference. Indifference, they would do nothing. They would just flow past each other, and that would be that. The universe itself is always striving for. I try not to use the $5 words too much on this podcast, so bear with me. The universe is always striving for homeostasis. Homeostasis is beyond being balanced. It's having everything diffused and put into a state of equilibrium with each other. So everything's perfectly mixed together. It's not too hot. It's not too cold. There actually aren't hot and cold. The temperatures are balanced. Everything's spread out evenly. Everything beyond balance. Everything's perfectly mixed and everything. That is the state the universe wants to be in. And the ultimate state of that is the void of space, where the energy is so spread out and so evenly spaced out that we like to pretend that it's empty. And it's not. Space isn't empty. Don't let anybody lie to you and tell you space is empty. There are billions and billions and billions of particles out there, but they're so far apart. They're so spread out in this vastness that it's difficult for them to interact with each other because they're so far apart. But it's not empty.
It's like taking all the slices from a loaf of bread and 1 tablespoon of butter and spreading it over all those slices, and somebody going, "Did you even put butter on this?"
Yeah.
Similar kind of thing. Butter's on there. It's just spread out.
Imperceptible.
So it's imperceptible.
The universe isn't indifferent. It is just seeking a very specific thing. And that is this state of ultimate homeostasis where no new energy is being added in and no new energy has to be dissipated out. That's what the universe wants. That's the state it's striving to get to. And it will always take the quickest, easiest, simplest path to get there. Water flows downhill. Yes, because of gravity, but actually not because of gravity. It's because gravity makes it the quickest, easiest, simplest way to get the water from the high plates to the low plates. If there were any other forces that made that simpler, like a siphon, for example, then the water will go up because the siphon has created an easier path for the water to flow. So the siphon carries the water up, and we use those all the time to move things. The universe is not indifferent. It just wants a very specific thing. And if it isn't different about anything, it doesn't really care how it gets there as long as it gets there. It neither knows nor cares if a tree gets knocked down in a storm. All it cares about is that energy is dispensed in the wind, is dissipated in the wind. And honestly, for me, I find it comforting that we live in a chaotic universe. I grew up in an evangelical Christian home where everything was the act of an angry, vengeful, punishing God. So if I got sick, it's because I sinned. If I stubbed my toe, it's because of a personal fault of mine. If a storm happened, it's because the people in that area deserved it. And that is a terrible, hateful way to live. I find it so much more comforting that I don't have to worry about doing anything in my life that will cause a storm to hit the town that I'm in. Unless I build like some evil, Dr. Evil weather machine and get all mad scientists about it. That's freeing to me. That's liberating to me. And it's oddly comforting because it frees me up from all this responsibility that I grew up with. That if I don't behave, storms and diseases are going to come to the town and country that I live in. And I mean this with all sincerity in my heart. Thank God that's not how the universe actually works. So why do bad things happen to good people? Because we as people choose to call some things good and some things bad. Random things happen to random people at random times, and we project meaning on it. That doesn't make us wrong for projecting meaning on it. I've had friends die in car accidents, and yeah, that was a great evil. One time it was an accident, and one time it was a drunk driver, and I had somebody to blame, and that caused a lot of anger inside me. But the universe isn't trying to punish anyone. The universe isn't trying to do anything. The universe does not have moral judgment. And if anybody tries to tell you that the universe does, they need to go back to class and learn basic physics. There is no morality to physics. All right. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I hope that this has helped you out. I hope maybe it's brought you some answers or at least some ways of thinking about this. I would love to know what your thoughts are on this subject. You can let us know in the comments. If you're listening to us on YouTube or Spotify, you can leave a comment right there. If you're listening to us anywhere else, even if they say you can leave a comment, they do not notify us, so we will not know. But you leave a comment there anyway, because engagement is magic. And then head over to creationspaths.com and click on chat. You can leave a comment there, and we will get notified. We will be able to respond to you. While you're there, if you happen to have a few dollars you can pass our way, we offer monthly and annual memberships. You can also support us on Patreon and Ko-fi. I am CE Dorset on both. You can do one-time donations on Ko-fi as well. We also have Cash Out Creations. If you don't have any money right now, or you don't know if we're the kind of people that you want to give your hard-earned treasure to, I completely understand that. But if we've done anything that you've enjoyed or that's helped you or that you think would help others, please share it. That helps us out immensely.
Next time we pick up in our Druidcraft 101 series, we're going to be talking about the ways of love and getting into the next chapter.
So there's reading to do. We're heading out. As you know, we like to end every episode with a prayer. And I would like to say a brief prayer to Mother Dun, the shadowy mother of the Tua, who is in my heart the spirit of the earth, the great flow of life that moves through all things, and the very magic that we sustain upon. Help us and guide us to see the true workings of this world and to not cast judgment on things that do not require judgment to be laid upon them. To find the flow of life and to move with it until it is time to put our feet down and divert the waters to better ends. Amen.
Amen.